Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is the Ukraine War news update, first part thereof, for the 10th of March 2024. To all my Irish viewers and Irish friends out there, all I can say is, bah, bah, ha. And that is today's rugby-orientated guffaw. Okay, let's go to where we normally start. Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. Apologies, Ireland. We have some significant numbers yet again. 900 personnel lost is a huge number. Yes, it's not over 1,000. We have seen regularly numbers posted over 1,000 in that category, but it is still incredibly significant. 19 tanks is a huge haul of tanks to lose in one day. 27 armoured personnel vehicles and 38 artillery systems are both well above, in fact, double the average in those categories. 3 multiple launch rocket systems is high. 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems is high. 69 vehicles and fuel tanks is right at the upper end of the spectrum. We've seen that category, we've seen records broken yesterday and very high numbers over the last 2 or 3 days. I think the Russians are using a lot of vehicles on the front lines that aren't necessarily vehicles that fall into the previous categories. So when they start using golf buggies, when they start using goats, these sort of very light jeeps, when they start using quad bikes, ATVs and whatnot, and losing them, that's a category they go into. And I think that, as I always say, statistics tell a story, and I think that's part of the story there. 6 pieces of special equipment as well lost. So some high numbers in a number of those categories, I think, indicating that the Russians are having a tough time of trying to advance in certain areas, trying to make that ground. Okay, let's try and make sense of these statistics. Let's look at Andrew Perpetua's lost stats for the day before as he and his team surveys the socials. This marked in red is a single missile strike, I believe, and that is taking out a number of vehicles that are kind of unknown vehicles, just destroyed charred remains, I guess, of stuff. Claims to be a Patriot TEL, and maybe a command vehicle, maybe a car in that missile strike. So that is the one I presume I was referring to yesterday, where that Iskander missile took out a whole bunch of stuff. Now, what's interesting here is one sort of doesn't massively disagree. It just says the claim is a Patriot. So it is this idea that's moved on. There's still some people in my thread from my breaking news piece yesterday talking about how that was an S-300. It was initially claimed to be an S-300. In fact, even the Russians initially claimed it to be an S-300. But I think due to the identification of the chassis, the German chassis of those vehicles, it was then later changed to being probably a Patriot launcher. Now, Andrew here has some more to add to that, because I was like, 2 launchers seem to have been taken out. That's with the immediate blast point of the Iskander missile. But of course, that's going to be throwing out all sorts of debris and shrapnel. And so there's the really high chances more was damaged. Well, he's claiming that destroyed in that strike was, as well as that pickup truck and maybe a car, it could be a command vehicle, and 3 launchers. That would be an absolutely devastating strike if that is the case. What else can we add to that? An electronic warfare vehicle, a number of T-64 BV tanks, and a BMP-1. So that alone is, it almost doesn't matter what the Russians have above. That is just a hugely valuable set of equipment. But of course, there's lots of caveats to be applied to that. Lots of unknowns still. The dust will settle, I'm sure. Then when we look at the Russian losses, we have some artillery, a Grad, a 240mm self-propelled howitzer. Grad is a multiple launch rocket system, and other bits of artillery. We have a T-90M tank, so that's the most valuable Russian tank. Fell in a hole. There's a lot of this happening. So if you watch Andrew Perpetua over time, you realise that one of the recurring themes at the moment is vehicles on both sides. A lot of Ukrainian vehicles have been lost. In fact, high-value ones. I'm fairly sure. Did one of the Abrams get lost for this? Where they basically I presume the visuals when you're driving in a tank, you're often looking through a very, unless your commander's out the hatch, you're driving looking through a very small hatch, a very small sort of window, if you like, and your visuals are not great, right? And so you can look ahead and it all looks like flat ground, but that won't take into account a big crater that you might just suddenly drive across. You don't have that elevated viewpoint. It's not elevated enough to see the craters. And so what you're seeing an awful lot of at the moment, tanks and infantry fighting vehicles and APCs driving into craters and not being able to get out and having to be abandoned. So here we have a T-90M, high value tank, highest value tank the Russians have, falling into a hole. So almost certainly driving into some large aviation bomb crater or some other munition ordnance crater, and then literally not being able to get out. And then what do? You need a recovery vehicle, so you have to leave it there. And if that is an attack that you're doing into the grey zone, forward onto the enemy positions, you're highly unlikely to be able to get a recovery vehicle to that point. In other words, that vehicle, as expensive and valuable as that is, both in terms of monetary replacement and what it does for you and your capabilities, is lost due to something that is frustratingly kind of simple and conceptually avoidable, right? You just don't drive into craters. But actually, don't drive into craters. When you're in a war zone, you've got all sorts of variables going on and all sorts of things to distract your attention is relatively easy. And it must be relatively easy because we're seeing both sides do it an awful lot and losing a lot of kit as a result. Infantry fighting vehicles, BMP 1s and 2s and BTR 82s. We are seeing more and more BTRs 82s on those lists, and I think that tells you something as well. A number of MTLBs. Then we've got ATVs, four-wheelers. I presume that's quad bikes, 4 quad bikes taken out by first-person view drones. They're being used on the front line. You're thinking, are you using them because they're a great thing to use, or are you using that because actually you don't have the APC capacity? There's no capacity for APCs in the large scale across the Russian forces anymore, that you're having to use light trucks, light jeeps, and ATVs, quad bikes. Yeah, interesting. So I think Russians have lost a lot of kit there. Ukrainians have lost some really high value kit, which is going too smart. Okay, to add to that, there's imagery of a book launcher. This is an anti-aircraft system. Now, what's interesting about this one is it's on one of these tailings spoils heaps. I don't know exactly where. Is that Horlivka or somewhere? But interesting, they're putting one up there. And then, of course, like I've said before, as soon as you take those positions and show yourself to be in control of those big mounds, yeah, you've got good visuals over the surrounding area, but you also stick out like a sore thumb. And in this case, there's no cover there. There are no trees growing on the side. You put a book up there, and that bad boy is going to be very easy to spot. It might be good for blowing stuff up in the sky, but it's also good for getting blown up on the mound. And then we have here the fifth, just a couple of bits of footage just to let you know that there's just a huge amount of footage coming out from the Ukrainians at the moment. There's a lot of footage of Russian stuff, of the Russians blowing up things, and I've shown you a lot of that, like the Patriot systems, a number of air defense systems over the last few weeks, the HIMARS. So the Russians are really concentrating on finding those high-value targets. They're using reconnaissance drones very effectively. The Ukrainians are doing a good job, on the other hand, of obliterating columns of vehicles still. The 58th Brigade destroyed the attacking Russian column on the southern front. So it appears that Robotyne has actually been really painful for the Russians. I think recently they've tried to attack Robotyne from the south, from the west, from the south. They're now trying to go around it. They are losing a lot of equipment around there, but just generally wherever the Russians are attacking at the moment, they appear to be losing a lot of equipment, and different Ukrainian brigades are throwing out footage of absolutely decimating Russian vehicles. National Guard Unit Omega showing themselves repelling attacks near Robotyne there again. So lots of footage coming up from the south, as well as from the normal places like Novomykhailivka and Avdiivka and whatnot. Now, Here we have a piece of Russian footage showing a Lancet strike on a Ukrainian landing boat, Project 1176L434 Svatova. The ship is very seriously damaged. We can say that the war is over for it. I don't know where this was, and I presume this is recent, but a bit of a landing craft there being taken out by the Russians. Again, Lancet drones causing a big problem for the Ukrainians still, and this could be, the boats that we see often here. It doesn't qualify what boats they are on Andrew's stats. At least one of those boats might well have been this landing craft, which will be annoying, obviously, for the Ukrainians, in the hope that there weren't any crew on board at that time. And then in Crimea, we have a Swedish Archer that I referenced yesterday, was it, or the day before? Artillery system. No, sorry. Got my knickers in the twist there. This is a Swedish Archer going on a counter battery spree. So this wasn't the one that was damaged the other day. This is one that has been going around damaging lots of other stuff. So when we see stats like 38 artillery systems in a single day, and then you see a single piece of Ukrainian self-propelled howitzer equipment take out a number of bits of kit for the Russians, a few D20s listed there. Archers are super good, aren't they? I mean, if you have, I'm sure I know I've shown you footage of how good they are and what their capabilities are. Just go and look variously online at YouTube. You can see, this one's a video of an Archer shooting and scooting. Basically, drives up, parks up, fires a whole bunch of rounds off, and then drives off in super quick time, which means that it's very difficult to hit with counter battery fire. So this is just, it shows the exact, how long it takes for it to do its business and fire off a number of shells. So in fact, nice timing here. 14 seconds in action. First round is sent after 23 seconds, second round after 32 seconds, third round after 40 seconds, out of action at 50 seconds, and then jogging on just a short time later. So that's about just over a minute, and it can fire. So there you go, 74 seconds, it's leaving. That's 1 minute, 14 seconds, and it can fire 3 rounds off. And it can carry, it's got automatic loading, fuses, just go and look online at all the different Archer videos you can see, and this is a really good bit of kit. That's why Sweden joining NATO, there's another good reason that they're in there. They can bring so much to the table. So yes, the Ukrainians have had a couple of these damaged recently, but they are incredibly useful at taking out Russian, in this case, counter battery fire to take out Russian artillery itself. And this is partly why, as I say, there are so many bits of Russian artillery on the lists on a daily basis. Right. Tim White, and this is kind of rumor, speculation. This has probably got fairly low probability of being true. At least something blew up, but what was it? So some people in occupied Mariupol think another Russian aircraft may have been shot down. There were very loud explosions heard by everyone in the city. There was no air raid warning, and yet soon afterwards this statement appeared, perhaps covering another embarrassment. So this is the idea that it could well have been. So if there's no air raid warning, then it's likely that whatever's in the sky is your own, right? And so, we're flying a plane near there. Don't raise the air raid warning, and yet you might well get a trigger happy air defense unit that then spots something on their own radar, doesn't realise that it's their own plane in this case, and then shoots it down. We've seen this a lot, and often when Ukrainians hit stuff and shoot down Russian planes, we have the Russians claiming that that's what happened anyway, because they're too embarrassed to admit that the Ukrainians can do that. So at the same time, a low altitude drone, which doesn't raise the air raid siren, of the Ukrainian armed forces when it was intercepted near approaches to Mariupol. Presumably the Pantsir S-1 anti-aircraft missile and gun complex was used, the crew of which used the high-speed 5736 missile defense system. So they're saying, okay, we use this really good missile to shoot down this drone, and that's what caused the big loud explosion. But some people are speculating that could have been a shoot down of a Russian plane. as I say, just a rumor. Okay, overnight, and this is moving on to distant strikes, Russia attacked Ukraine with another sizable wave of drones. 39 of them were sent, 35 shot down. Ukraine is doing a really good job of getting high interception rates at the moment. This has been a fairly dense week or so of Shahed drone attacks. The numbers are fairly significant that the Russians are sending. I'd be interested to see what those might go and look at Dell's stats to see what the last week has been like in terms of 2 weeks have been like in terms of Shahed drones. But 35 out of 39, that's pretty decent. So again, what goes up must come down. 39 of those all of them will be falling down almost certainly on the ground, unless they're shot down over the sea. But they will be causing issues even if they are intercepted. And then, of course, 4 get through. Where did they get through? Not 100% sure. Ukraine, there are reports of an attack on the district of Velika Belka in Odessa on Saturday night. So again, Odessa seems to be the main target area for the Russian Shaheeds at the moment. Listen to the quadruple explosions. I recorded this soundtrack 18 kilometers from Velika Belka. It appears to correspond to the attack that Tim White is referring to. So anyway, the point is that Odessa is one of the main targets for Russian Shahed drone attacks. Now, on the other side of the coin, with Ukraine attacking Russia, we know that Tokmak was targeted last night. And Tokmak's one of those places that used to be targeted all the time. And we hear about it not so much anymore. It used to be targeted a lot by HIMARS missiles. Explosions there last night, waiting for official confirmation. I have no idea what was targeted or what was shot at Tokmak, whether it's drones or HIMARS. But it's interesting to see that back in these kind of news nuggets. And Tim White then says, oh, look, another oil depot in Russia seems to be on fire. Officials in Kursk admit that a drone, quote, fell and caught fire on the territory of the oil depot. Fire brigades and emergency services are working at the scene, says the regional governor, awaiting photos. He then goes on to say a little bit later that the Russians then claim that it was an empty oil depot, and how convenient. So as you can see, Odessa was and Minohrad as well in non-occupied Donetsk was targeted, but Odessa too. And yeah, I can't see where, but it does. Yes, this is it. How convenient for Russia that the tank that Ukraine's drone hit at the oil depot just happened to be empty. Fire cause was just the drone burning, apparently, and they still haven't set up the stage for any photos yet. So, the Russians will claim that minimal damage is done to Ukrainian attacks. And it's often not the case. Now, Russian fuel storage has also been hit near the highway connecting Horlivka and Yazhinovarta in Donetsk Oblast, so that's north of Donetsk city. The area has been under Russian occupation since 2014, so it's another oil depot hit there. Then we're going to go to the strike 2 nights ago in Taganrog, where Ukrainian drones struck. A number of them struck at Taganrog, just over the border down on the Azov Sea, or the Sea of Azov. At least 4 drones reached the target. Earlier, Ukrainians reported that the Russian A-50 was destroyed inside the hangar. That was a bit of a rumour. I don't know how firmly that was claimed. Satellite image seems to validate the claim. New drones were used, low flight path and larger warhead. I don't know that you can really claim that any significant damage was done. That roof is not badly damaged. Interesting scorch mark on the runway though, and whether a plane was hit and has subsequently been removed. That is interesting. There's some damage to some other infrastructure there. But I always think, surely the next night shove another 20 drones at that and just keep going, keep plugging away. The night and morning drone attack on us was carried out by aircraft with new characteristics. This was from that night, remember. The warhead is much more powerful than previous models, and they fly very low. Anticipatory fixation is difficult. In other words, they can't acquire the target. Flight paths were through the territory of the LPR and DPR from... so if you remember, they're taking dog legs, basically, to escape targeting from air defense. And yeah, once again, the drone is much larger in size. The sound is like the Uranian, which is the Shahid. The warhead exceeds those previously recorded. Speed from 80 to 200 odd kilometers an hour. Flight altitude is only 12 to 15 meters, and small arms fire is ineffective when trying to shoot it down. So that situation there. So Tatragami has then brought out more of a detailed analysis of the satellite images. And he says that they've conducted a visual analysis of satellite imagery to assess the impact of the Ukrainian drone attack on the aircraft repair facility at Taganrog. So that's it there. And again, those images I don't think show too much damage. Nonetheless, a comparative analysis shows scorch marks on the roof of the building identified by our team as a final assembly facility where it was suspected Russians were conducting A-50 repairs the day before the attack. So that's, scorch marks there, some damage there, and some damage here. And then notably the A-50 is absent in the imagery from March the 8th and March the 9th, leaving uncertainty about its presence at the airfield during the operation. Earlier images disclosed by investigative journalists showed an A-50 parked near the hangar on February the 29th. And that's one where there's now a scorch mark. If the drones managed to penetrate the roof, the payload in drones would be enough to cause damage to equipment and aircraft inside. However, there are no visual indications of a significant fire inside the hangar, making it challenging to assess the extent of the damage. Further satellite imagery analysis shows that at least one S-300, S-400 battery was present at the airfield during the attack. Unless it serves as a decoy, this suggests that the Ukrainian drone's ability to penetrate Russian air defense systems, even in proximity to strategic objects. That is super, super important, right? So if they can get meaningful drone, with decent enough warheads and decent enough explosive capability into very highly sensitive areas to strike at those areas right next to S-300, 400 batteries, then that's good news. In summary, our team recognises that the destruction or damage of the A-50 can't be definitively concluded from this. Nonetheless, this remains a significant achievement for Ukraine due to the ability to bypass air defence and target an important facility within Russian territory. I would agree with that. I don't know that they've done much damage, but that interesting scorch mark on the runway there. Anyway, on to other bits and pieces. Ukraine war briefing from The Guardian says that Russian forces occupying Ukraine use torture as policy, according to a UN expert. So Alice Jill Edwards says that 90% of the so there's 103,000 open cases relating to war crimes and crimes against humanity. 90% of those, so about 90,000 plus, are torture cases. It's just absolutely incredible. So Russian armed forces and associated groups systematically use torture in occupied areas of Ukraine, pointing to a deliberate policy, a United Nations expert said. Alice Jill Edwards said on Friday she had drawn that conclusion after a visit to Ukraine in September. Edwards, a UN special rapporteur on torture, said Ukrainian prosecutors had told her there were about 103,000 open cases related to war crimes. And remember, that's like 5 months ago now. Moving on to 6 months. So there's a lot more since then against humanity, of which 90% were registered as torture cases. So I go back to what I often say, which is, who are the good guys? Who, if you are supporting Russia, is this what you're supporting? I mean, really? Have a look at yourself. Right. The next week, the bill on the mobilization of convicts and prisoners will be registered in the Verkhovna Rada. So, wow. I have been expecting this. I've been wondering whether the Ukrainians would do this. The Ukrainians desperately need boots on the ground. And the Russians, I've never massively criticised the Russians for doing what they've done in terms of for mobilising convicts. In terms of, I'll criticise it in terms of the ramifications of that, being that you have a huge number of convicted criminals running around doing stuff in a war zone. So are they going to be more likely to commit war crimes? Maybe, on past form. And then what do you do if you are to give them freedom when they get back? Well, that's going to be a complete nightmare. So that was a nightmare, and the Russians have now subsequently changed their rules so that if you go and fight in the armed forces and come back, you don't get pardoned. Right, so that is no longer the case. I'm not quite sure what the appeal is of fighting. So what the Russians have done is turned off the heating in the prisons. I mean, it's all really dodgy and very very coercive, but they are presenting a scenario whereby it is so unpleasant to be in prison that actually going to fight on the front line gives you a better, I don't know, better chance of enjoying life or something. I don't know. So anyway, that's where they're at the moment. But you have a very big set of people that are not really contributing to the economy. They're in prison, right? And the problem with mobilizing people from the economy is that you take 100,000 people out of there and you dump them on the front line, then that's 100,000 people not contributing to tax dollars and not sustaining the people on the front line. So it takes 8 people, as was announced last week, 8 people in the economy to fund one soldier on the front line, one soldier. So moving people from there to there has a double whammy effect of like, we don't have people in the economy, we're not raising the tax dollars, and that makes it even more difficult to fund not just the government, but to fund the actual army itself. So you're taking people out from there, and then you're increasing the cost of, the army, right? So the wages are going up by 100,000 people's worth of wages. Okay, so that's a double whammy, and that's why it's been really difficult to try and come up with a sustainable solution. Now, I've been waiting for this moment where the Ukrainians go, well, the Russians have done it. There's surely some merit here if we can do this correctly. I don't know how they're going to do it in a way that is not going to cause... They'll be looking at what the Russians did and trying to come up with ways that get around that. Because at the end of the day, you can look at this from so many different angles. You can say, well, why is it that all the nice, freedom-loving, good people who have got... working really hard in their lives and have all these families and are good law-abiding citizens are the ones that get pulled to the front line to sacrifice themselves, in a war, and the criminals are being locked up and they're the safest people in the country. Like, what's going on there? So, and I'm not excusing, justifying, whatever, but let's play around with all the ideas. So many different arguments for and against. Like, what about human rights? What about right to blah blah blah, right to X, right to Y? There are arguments that will say, okay, just taking people out of prisons is not cool, but then taking people out of society is not cool. And so, okay, let's have a situation where it's slightly better to take them out of prison. Okay, what are the practical ramifications of that? So anyway, yeah, that could be happening. He announced thousands of prisoners who are ready to become military. Most likely these will be separate detachments. I mean, there might be some real social cohesion issues if you start putting prisoners inside established units. So it might be you make a prisoner unit, but do you end up using them as cannon fodder more likely? Are they the people who get sent to Krinky? It's just, and is that good? Is that right? There are lots of questions about this, but I'm totally not surprised it's being tabled at all because Ukraine are that desperate for troops. And finally, oh my goodness, this is so bizarre, isn't it? A monument to Prigozhin and Utkin, 2 people assassinated by the Russian government, the owners of PMC Wagner, will be erected in Russia. Allegedly, figures of terrorists will be placed in the territory of the chapel of Goryachi Klyuch, Krasnodar region of Russia, a mass grave of mercenaries from the PMC Wagner is located there. I mean, there's a couple of things to say about that. One, obviously, that one of those people, the guy on the left, both those people were assassinated by Putin, effectively. And the other thing is that given how much the Russians rail against Nazis and call the Ukrainians Ukro-Nazis, this guy on the right had his torso covered in Nazi tattoos. Like, he was an open and overt neo-Nazi. And now you're building a statue to him, which means your words are hollow. Absolutely hollow when you make wild accusations of Ukrainians being Ukro-Nazis, etc., etc., etc. All that kind of nonsense. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Take care. Speak soon.